Gary's the only guy in history that can call a play and talk trash at the same time.
Man, banging it took a toll on Mike. It took a toll, and then
He was called the Glove for a reason. Gary Payton wasn't just a great defender, he was a nightmare. For 9 straight seasons, he made the all-defensive first team, picking up full-court pressure, talking trash from tip-off to the final buzzer, and making sure his opponents knew that every possession would be hell. But even the fiercest defender in NBA history had his limits. There were players Payton admitted he flat out hated going up against. Not because he was afraid, fear wasn't in his vocabulary, but because these matchups tested him in ways no other battles could. Some were too quick, some too strong. Others just had the perfect counter to his defensive genius. And when Payton's pride was on the line, nothing stung worse than an opponent who found a way to beat the Glove. Payton once said, "If I respected you, it's because you made me work. And there were guys I hated guarding, because no matter what I did, they kept coming." So today we're counting down the top 6 basketball players Gary Payton hated the most. These are the scorers who challenged his defense, the rivals who forced him to dig deeper, and the legends who turned trash talk into full-scale wars on the hardwood. And trust me, the names on this list aren't all the ones you'd expect. Some are obvious, others will surprise you, and one matchup in particular left Payton admitting, years later, that it was the toughest test of his entire career. Stay tuned, because once you hear who made the list, you'll never look at Gary Payton's legacy the same way again. Michael Jordan. If there was one battle Gary Payton couldn't avoid, it was with Michael Jordan. In 1996, the Seattle Supersonics met the Chicago Bulls in the NBA Finals. Payton was at the peak of his powers, Defensive Player of the Year, All-NBA guard, and the undisputed leader of Seattle's ferocious defense. But across from him stood Jordan, already a global icon, already a champion, already the man every player measured themselves against. Payton hated those games. Not because he backed down, but because Jordan made every possession a war. Whenever Payton pressed full court, Jordan matched his intensity. Whenever Payton tried to body him up, Jordan countered with footwork, fadeaways, and icy composure. The two exchanged constant trash talk. Payton never shut up, and Jordan never let it slide. "I told him I was gonna lock him down," Payton later recalled, and he just smiled at me like, "We'll see." In games 4 and 5, Payton actually slowed Jordan down, forcing him into tough shots and giving Seattle a glimmer of hope. But in the end, Jordan and the Bulls closed out the series in 6. And Payton admitted that as much as he hated facing him, there was no denying who came out on top. Years later, in The Last Dance, Jordan laughed when shown Payton's claim that he tired him out. But Payton stood by it. "I made him work. And that's all I ever wanted." Gary Payton, Michael Jordan was the ultimate contradiction. The opponent he hated most because he represented the one challenge even the Glove couldn't completely shut down. John Stockton. If Michael Jordan was the superstar Payton hated because of dominance, then John Stockton was the rival he hated because of frustration. Stockton didn't look intimidating. He wasn't built like a tank. He didn't talk trash. But for Gary Payton, he was a nightmare, because Stockton was always in the right place, always making the right play, and never giving an inch. Payton hated guarding him because you couldn't rattle Stockton. Try to bump him, he'd set his feet and take the charge. Try to pressure him, he'd slip a perfect pass to Karl Malone. Try to overpower him, he'd grab your jersey, set a sneaky screen, or deliver a little elbow just out of the referee's view. John was dirty, Payton admitted years later. Not in a bad way, but in a smart way. He knew every trick, every angle, and he used it all. Their duels in the 90s were fierce. Payton thrived on intensity, on speeding guards up and forcing mistakes. Stockton never played that game. He slowed things down, dictated the pace, and ran the Utah Jazz offense with machine-like precision. For Payton, that was maddening. He wanted chaos, but Stockton gave him structure. He wanted to intimidate, but Stockton just shrugged it off. And worst of all, the Jazz kept winning. By the end of his career, Payton respected Stockton immensely, but in the moment, he hated every second of it. because no matter how hard he tried, John Stockton always seemed one step ahead. Allen Iverson. Some players Gary Payton could silence with his mouth. Allen Iverson was not one of them. From the moment Iverson entered the league, Payton knew he was different. 6 feet tall, lightning fast, and absolutely fearless, Iverson attacked the game with the same intensity Payton brought on defense. And that created a collision every time they met. Payton thrived on getting into opponents' heads, constant chatter, relentless pressure, bumping and clawing at every possession. Most players cracked eventually. Iverson didn't. He just kept coming, no matter how many words Payton threw his way. Allen didn't care what you said to him, Payton admitted. He'd just look at you, cross you up, and go drop 40. And that's exactly what drove Payton crazy. Iverson's crossover was nearly impossible to contain, his first step unmatched, and once he got into rhythm, there was nothing even the glove could do to shut him down. One of their most intense battles came in 1999, when Iverson poured in 41 points against Payton's Sonics. Despite Payton's best efforts, hand-checking, pressing, talking trash, Iverson danced past him again and again, leaving defenders scrambling and the crowd in disbelief. What Payton hated most wasn't just that Iverson scored, it was the way he did it, with swagger, with defiance, and with a complete refusal to be intimidated. Over time, Payton grew to respect Iverson deeply. But in those battles, he represented everything Payton despised. A guard too fast to catch, too tough to rattle, and too fearless to stop. Reggie Miller. Gary Payton loved to run his mouth. The problem with facing Reggie Miller was that Miller loved it just as much, and could back it up. Their clashes weren't just basketball games, they were verbal wars layered on top of physical battles. Payton would bark from the opening tip, and Miller would smirk, fire back, and then bury a 3 right in his face. Few players dared to challenge the glove at his own game of trash talk. Reggie Miller thrived on it. What made it worse was Miller's relentlessness. He never stopped moving. He ran defenders ragged around screens, wearing them down until their legs were gone. Payton prided himself on endurance and effort, but Miller forced him to chase every second. And when it mattered most, Miller always seemed to deliver the dagger. One game in the late 90s, Miller hit a clutch 3 over Payton, then turned and chirped, "That all you got, glove?" Payton was furious, but all he could do was take the ball and keep playing. Moments like that burned into his memory. For Payton, the hate came from frustration. He wanted to shut Miller up, but Miller wouldn't stop talking. He wanted to wear him down, but Miller never stopped running. He wanted to control the game, but Miller lived for chaos in the final minutes. Reggie Miller wasn't just an opponent for Gary Payton. He was a mirror image, in mentality, ruthless, fearless, and addicted to the mental war as much as the physical one. And for Payton, that made every battle feel personal. Jason Kidd. Not every rivalry was about trash talk. With Jason Kidd, it was about reputation. Payton believed he was the best point guard of the 90s. No questions asked. Then Kidd arrived, and suddenly the conversation shifted. Media crowned Kidd as the new prototype. Bigger, stronger, a walking triple-double. For Payton, that hype was personal. He hated the idea that someone else could claim the title he fought for every night. On the court, their battles were wars of control. Payton wanted to speed things up, apply pressure, and turn every possession into chaos. Kidd slowed the game down, orchestrated perfectly timed passes, and punished mistakes with precision. Payton's trash talk rolled off him. Kidd wasn't interested in words, just results. What drove Payton mad was Kidd's vision. No matter how hard Payton pressed, Kidd always seemed to find the open man. One flick of the wrist, and the Sonics' defense was broken. And while Payton prided himself on making opponents uncomfortable, Kidd never looked rattled. The rivalry wasn't just about skills, it was about identity. Payton hated being compared to Kidd, hated hearing debates about who was the real leader at the position. And every matchup felt like proof one way or the other. By the early 2000s, Kidd's Nets reached the finals, something Payton's Sonics never achieved. For Payton, That stung. Kidd had taken the spotlight, and all Payton could do was fight to remind people who set the standard first. For the glove, Jason Kidd wasn't just another opponent, he was the challenger to his throne, and that's the kind of rival Payton hated most. Mitch Richmond. Before Kobe, before Iverson, before the new wave of superstar guards, there was Mitch Richmond, and Gary Payton hated every minute of guarding him. Richmond wasn't flashy, he didn't dunk over people or talk non-stop like Reggie Miller, but night after night, he delivered. A consistent 20 to 25 points per game scorer, Richmond had one of the strongest frames at the guard position, and a jumper Payton described as automatic. What drove Payton crazy was Richmond's relentlessness. He didn't stop. Every possession, he moved with purpose, posting up smaller guards, knocking down mid-range shots, curling off screens and punishing defenders who gave him even a sliver of space. For Payton, who prided himself on taking opponents out of rhythm, Richmond was impossible to shake. "I hated guarding Mitch," Payton later admitted. "He wasn't flashy, but he was strong, smart, and you couldn't take a play off. If you did, it was a bucket." Their matchups in the 90s, Sonics versus Kings or Warriors, were grinded-out battles. Payton would dig in, talking trash, pressing full court. Richmond wouldn't say much back. He just scored. And for Payton, that silence was even worse. Richmond didn't need to get into Payton's head. He let his game do the talking. And when the final buzzer sounded, more often than not, Payton walked off the floor knowing he'd been in a fight. For Gary Payton, Mitch Richmond represented the type of opponent every defender dreads. Unshakable, unbothered, and deadly consistent. And that's why, even years later, Payton admitted Richmond was one of the players he hated guarding most. Gary Payton built his name on defense, on trash talk, on making opponents suffer. But even he had players he flat out hated to see across from him. Some were too quick, some too strong, others just had the perfect answer for everything the glove tried to do. And those battles, the ones that pushed him to his limits, are the ones we still remember today. Because hate on the court isn't weakness. It's respect disguised as rivalry. Every time Payton admitted he hated facing someone, what he was really saying was, "They made me better." That's what made Gary Payton special. He never ran from the fight. He embraced it, even when it meant losing battles, even when it meant walking off the floor angry, drained, and beaten up. And maybe that's why his legacy still hits so hard. Because when the glove locked in, even the players he hated the most had to earn everything. So here's the question. Which of Payton's rivals do you think gave him the fight of his life? Drop your answer in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of basketball's fiercest battles.